labor. The authority of the president under Section 710 gives the section to determine periods of national defense emergency is delegated to the Secretary of Homeland Security. He's now got presidential authority to determine periods of national defense emergency. If he says it's an emergency for national defense, then it is. C, the head of an agency may implement gives the section of this order with respect to NDER operations in such agency. D, the head of each agency with an NDER unit may exercise the authority under section so on and so on. That's presidential authority. The head of each unit may exercise presidential authority to employ civilian personnel when activating all or part of its NDER unit. You will have to serve this if they ask you to, or if they tell you to. The exercise of this authority shall be subject to the provisions of, gives the section, of this order and shall not be redelegated. Congress or the Senate or any other civilian oversight agency does not have a say-so in how this is going to be carried out. That's what that means.
That's amazing.
Section E, the head of any agency may activate an NDER unit in whole or in part upon the written determination of the Secretary of Homeland Security that an emergency affecting the national defense exists and that the activation of the unit is necessary to carry out the emergency program functions of the agency. Let me explain what that means. The head of any agency, all of the heads of agency that he described up towards the beginning, which was the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Secretary of Agriculture, the Secretary of Energy, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the Secretary of Transportation, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Commerce. Any of those secretaries at any time can go to the Department of Homeland Security and say to them that we have a situation that we believe constitutes a national defense and we need a slave labor corps. Okay? That's what that's talking about. So I'm going to read that again so that you understand what this says. Consultants, the head of each agency, otherwise delegated functions under this order, is delegated the authority of the president to employ persons of outstanding experience. I'm sorry, wait a minute, I'm getting ahead of myself. The head of each agency may exercise authority to employ civilian personnel when activating all or part of its NDER unit. The exercise of this authority shall be subject to the provisions of, gives the section, of this order and shall not be redelegated. The head of any agency may activate an NDER unit in whole or in part upon the written determination of the Secretary of Homeland Security that an emergency affecting the national defense exists and that activation of the unit is necessary to carry out the emergency program functions of the agency. If people are not working hard enough to get things done, then they can activate one of these presidential national defense executive reserve units composed of civilian slave laborers, essentially, that have to serve this unit whenever they say that an emergency exists and gets permission from the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Okay? Prior to activating the unit, the head of the agency shall notify in writing the assistant to the president for Homeland Security and counterterrorism of the impending activation. Okay. Section 502, consultants. How do we know that they're talking about slave labor? We're going to read it right now. The head of each agency, otherwise delegated functions under this order, is delegated authority of the president, presidential authority, to employ persons of outstanding experience and ability without compensation, and to employ experts, consultants, or organizations. The authority delegated by this section may not be redelegated. So these heads of these agencies are given presidential authority to employ persons of outstanding experience and ability, in other words, specialists in their field, okay, without compensation and to employ experts, consultants, or organizations without compensation. This is slave labor. Popeye, anything to contribute to that?
I actually got I had a conversation with somebody about this earlier, and they were like, "Well, I don't know if how are they going to get people to work for them if they don't pay them?" And I started laughing, and I'm like, "Slave labor." And they were like, "But you'd have to pay somebody, or else they wouldn't work." And I was like, "No, do you know anything about history? Like for real? Do you read anything? Stalin's gulags, Hitler's work camps, his prison camps. Do you read at all?" If people amaze me when their level of not wanting to believe this. And
Denial.
yeah, like, oh no, come on, it's in your face. I had somebody tell me earlier, uh, I don't want to believe it, even though it's from it's on the White House website. Are you sure that Anonymous didn't like make this as a fake page and somehow put it into their website? And I was like, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure that this is the real deal. It was released by the White House. I would bet money on it. But are you sure, Popeye? Are you really sure about this? Because I don't know. It could be fake. No, this isn't disinfo because it's so in your face, just out of control that people don't want to believe that this is real. I mean, that's
Right.
how Orwellian this is. That's how out of control this is.
By the way, for those that are interested and want to get to it quickly, that section that discussed consultants without compensation was section 502 under part 5. Okay. Let's move on. Part 6, labor requirements. Okay. Now these are the requirements in order to gather and train these slave labor forces. Section 601, Secretary of Labor. The Secretary of Labor, in coordination with the Secretary of Defense and the heads of other agencies as deemed appropriate by the Secretary of Labor, shall 1. Collect and maintain data necessary to make a continuing appraisal, this is an ongoing program, of the national workforce needs for the purposes of national defense. Okay? It's talking about the nation's workforce, the slave labor force. 2. Upon request by the Director of Selective Service, the Director of Selective Service, and in coordination with the Secretary of Defense, assist the Director of Selective Service in development of policies regulating the induction and deferment of persons for duty in the armed services. So they're talking about reinstituting the draft. Okay? The induction and deferment of persons for duty in the armed services. This is under the the Director of Selective Service and the Secretary of Defense. 3. Upon the request from the head of an agency with authority under this order, consult with that agency with respect to 1. The effect of contemplated actions on labor demand and utilization. In other words, how this is going to affect labor demand and utilization. 2, the relation of labor demand to materials and facilities requirements. And 3, such other matters as will assist in making the exercise of priority and allocations functions consistent with the effective utilization and distribution of labor. 4. Upon request from the head of an agency with authority under this order, 1. Formulate plans, programs, and policies for meeting the labor requirements of actions to be taken for national defense purposes. And 2. Estimate training needs to help address national defense requirements and promote necessary and appropriate training programs. In other words, they're going to be, taking people and training them. So can anybody say FEMA camp? 5.
Re-education camps, they call them.
Yeah. 5. Develop and implement an effective labor management relations policy, in other words, a propaganda policy, to support the activities and programs under this order. Let me read that again. Develop and implement an effective labor management relations policy. How best to propagandize this? To support the activities and programs under this order, with the cooperation of other agencies as deemed appropriate by the Secretary of Labor, including the National Labor Relations Board, the Federal Labor Relations Authority, and the National Mediation Board, and the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service. B. All agencies